She was ready to leave her small mountain town forever. But that night, her old German shepherd came home, dragging a half-frozen puppy through the snow. When she wrapped it in her coat, she froze. Around the puppy's neck was a red ribbon, the same mark from the case that had destroyed her career and taken her partner's life. The past wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for her to come back. What happened next will break your heart and make you believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Hey. The night had swallowed Aspen Ridge whole. Snow fell in dense, angry sheets, devouring every sound until even the wind seemed to move in silence. For 15 seconds, the town vanished, its houses buried under white, its roads erased by the storm. The only light came from the police station sign, flickering weakly like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, Officer Claire Donovan sat behind her desk, staring at the last line of her transfer papers. She was 32, with a tall, athletic build, and the kind of quiet strength that came from long years of keeping herself together when everything else fell apart. Her hair, a deep auburn, was tied in a neat bun that had long lost its shape after hours of duty. Her eyes, green, sharp, and reflective, carried the heavy calm of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. This was her final night in Aspen Ridge. Tomorrow, she would leave the mountain town for good, transferring back to Denver where, once upon a time, she had believed justice meant something. But 5 years ago, a raid had shattered that belief. An explosion during a wildlife trafficking bust killed her partner, Detective Miles Kerrigan, and nearly took her too. Since that night, Claire had lived with the quiet ache of guilt, the kind that snowed over your heart until you forgot what warmth felt like. At her feet lay Ranger, her 8-year-old German shepherd and retired canine partner. He was massive, with a thick sable coat graying around the muzzle and one ear permanently bent from that same explosion. His right hind leg carried a faint limp, but his eyes, amber and steady, still burned with intelligence and loyalty. Ranger was the kind of dog who didn't just obey orders. He understood them. The town saw him as a relic, but to Claire, he was the one soul who hadn't left her when the world turned cold. The heater in the station buzzed weakly, throwing out more noise than warmth. Outside, the storm's voice roared, clawing at the walls like something alive. The power lines crackled, and suddenly the lights blinked twice, then went out. The station fell into darkness. Claire sighed. Figures. She grabbed her flashlight from the desk and flicked it on. The narrow beam cut across the room, catching the glint of Ranger's collar. He had lifted his head now, ears pricked. "It's just the storm," Claire murmured. But Ranger didn't relax. His nose twitched, muscles stiff beneath his fur. Then, from somewhere outside, a faint sound rose through the storm, a whimper, thin and fleeting. Claire frowned. She turned down the static-filled police radio, listening closer. The sound came again. Not the wind, not the storm. Something alive. Ranger barked once, short and sharp. "All right, I hear it," she said, already reaching for her coat. "Let's check it out." The wind slammed the door open as she stepped outside. Snowflakes swirled like ash in the beam of her flashlight, thick enough to sting her face. The cold bit through her uniform instantly. Ranger bounded ahead, nose low to the ground, pulling against the leash. "Easy, boy," she muttered, squinting into the whiteout. They trudged through knee-deep snow, past the patrol cars half buried in drifts, until Ranger suddenly veered left toward the back fence of the station. His tail was stiff, his bark urgent. Claire followed, and stopped dead. There, half buried beneath a collapsed mound of snow, was a small shape, a puppy. Its fur was matted with ice, its body trembling weakly. She dropped to her knees. Oh, God. The pup couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. A German shepherd, too, by the look of its paws and ears, though its color was a faded brown, dull from starvation. When she brushed the snow away, she noticed something tied around its neck. A strip of red fabric, frayed and frozen stiff. Her breath caught. That color, that pattern. She had seen it before. It was the same red ribbon tied around the collars of the trafficked dogs in the case that had killed Miles. For a moment, the world went silent. The snow, the wind, everything disappeared under the weight of memory. Ranger whined softly, nuzzling the tiny body as if urging it to move. Claire blinked hard, forcing herself back to the present. "Okay, easy. You're gonna be all right," she whispered, wrapping the puppy inside her coat. The small body was cold against her chest, limp but breathing. She stood, clutching the pup close, and fought her way back to the station. Once inside, she laid the puppy gently on her desk and rubbed its sides to generate heat. Ranger stood beside her, his nose brushing the pup's ear, tail still and low, a guardian's instinct. Claire's flashlight cast a trembling glow over the desk. The red ribbon glinted faintly under it. She leaned in, brushing her thumb over the fabric, and saw faint black letters printed along the edge. A47R. She froze, the same code as the file that had vanished from her evidence locker in Denver 5 years ago. "No way," she whispered. The puppy stirred weakly, letting out a faint cry that pierced through the storm outside. Claire pressed her hand against its side, feeling the fragile rhythm of its heartbeat. "You're safe now," she said softly. "You're not dying on me." Ranger barked once, low but determined, as if agreeing. She wrapped the puppy in an emergency blanket, laying it beside the space heater. Her mind was spinning. How could something from that case show up here, in this forgotten town on her last night? Then her police radio crackled to life. Static first, then a voice. Male, rough, but distinct. "Leave it. Don't file. Prioritize main roads only." She recognized the voice instantly. Sheriff Wade Harper. Sheriff Harper, her superior, was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and sharp in a way that made most people step aside. He had a politician's smile and the kind of eyes that watched everything but revealed nothing. He'd been good to her when she first arrived, offering quiet shifts, easy cases. But lately, his instructions had grown strange, even evasive. Now his voice on the radio sounded deliberate. "Repeat," he said again, slower this time. "Ignore all missing animal reports until further notice. That's an order." Claire froze. What the hell? Ranger's ears perked. He tilted his head toward the radio as if he understood too. Claire pressed the transmit button. "Sheriff, this is Officer Donovan. I've got a..." Static drowned her out. The line went dead. She tried again. Nothing. The puppy whimpered, pulling her attention back. The little creature's breathing had grown steadier. Its paw twitched. Claire smiled faintly despite the chill in her bones. "Looks like you've still got some fight in you," she whispered. She reached for her thermos and dripped a bit of warm water on the puppy's lips. It responded, weak but willing. Ranger watched closely, tail thumping once. "You did good, boy," she told him. "You found him before the snow did." Ranger nudged her hand, then looked toward the window, ears pinned. Claire followed his gaze but saw nothing, just the storm outside, endless and white. She turned the radio back on. Static. Only static. Somewhere deep in her gut, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years stirred again. Unease mixed with purpose. This wasn't just a stray animal. And that red ribbon wasn't a coincidence. Claire sat back, the puppy curled in her arms, its breathing fragile but alive. Ranger lay at her feet, silent but alert, eyes fixed on the door as if guarding more than just the station. The storm roared against the windows, but inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Claire looked down at the code printed on the ribbon one more time. A47R. The same ghost she'd been running from had just come crawling out of the snow. She whispered to herself, "It's happening again." And outside, the wind screamed like it agreed. Snow still fell outside, softer now, though the wind moaned faintly around the corners of the station. The power hadn't come back, but Claire had coaxed life into the backup generator. A single lamp hummed over the desk, throwing a tired yellow glow across the room. The puppy, now named Pip, lay wrapped in a thick towel near the heater. His breathing had steadied. Every few minutes his tail twitched, a small, stubborn sign of life. Claire sat on the floor beside him, hair damp, eyes shadowed by the sleepless hours she'd spent fighting the cold out of his little body. Ranger lay nearby, head resting on his paws, his gaze never leaving Pip. The old shepherd looked tired too, but there was a quiet alertness in his posture, as if he understood that the tiny creature at their feet carried more than just fragile bones. "Easy now, little guy," Claire murmured. She dipped her hand into a bowl of warm water, testing it with her fingers before beginning to clean Pip's fur. The blood had clotted into hard patches against his skin. She worked gently, whispering small comforts as she went. As she brushed aside the matted hair under Pip's belly, she froze. There, barely visible beneath the thin fur, was a small tattoo, a strange, circular marking with a string of numbers below it. It wasn't a tag from a vet. It was something else. "Jesus," Claire whispered. Ranger's ears perked. He stood and stepped closer, nose twitching. When the beam from the lamp hit the mark, the dog let out a deep, throaty growl, not loud, but tense, as if he'd seen a ghost. Claire looked from the tattoo to her old partner. "You recognize it, don't you?" Ranger's tail was stiff, his gaze locked on the spot. He barked once, sharp, his hackles rising. The sound stirred something in Claire's chest, a flash of memory she'd buried for years. A warehouse, the smell of gasoline, and Miles shouting her name. 2 years ago, Denver, the night everything went wrong. They had raided a compound believed to be hiding endangered animals stolen from across state lines. Wolves, exotic birds, dogs bred for illegal trade. The intel had come from a trusted source. But the moment they entered, everything exploded. A trap. The blast threw her into a wall. She'd woken up beneath rubble, ears ringing, lungs full of smoke. Ranger, then a younger, stronger dog, had dragged her out by her sleeve, refusing to leave even as the flames closed in. But Miles never came out. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was a burned metal tag near his hand, a code just like the one on Pip's belly. Claire leaned back, breathing slowly through the ache in her chest. She reached for her notebook and wrote down the sequence from the tattoo, 47 RL5. The same pattern. Her mind screamed for logic, but all she could hear was the echo of that explosion and the weight of unfinished business pressing against her ribs. Ranger nudged her knee with his muzzle. His eyes were calm now, but heavy, as if to say, "You already know what this means." She exhaled. "Yeah, I know." The generator clicked softly. The heater coughed and settled into a quiet hum. Claire wrapped Pip tighter, rubbing him dry. "You're gonna make it," she whispered. "You have to." She stood and crossed the room to a small metal cabinet, dragging out an old storage box marked "Personal, do not discard." Dust rose in small clouds when she pried the lid open. Inside lay fragments of another life, photos, police reports, fragments of burned evidence, and one small wooden box that used to belong to Miles Kerrigan. Miles had been older than her by 10 years, built solid like a man who'd wrestled his demons into submission through sheer will. He was the kind of officer who laughed easily, cursed under his breath, and always had her back. Losing him had carved a hollow space inside her that nothing, no metal, no transfer, had ever filled. Claire hesitated, then opened the wooden box. Inside were his badge, a broken wristwatch, and a folded scrap of paper yellowed with age. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. On the page was a hand-drawn symbol, the same circular design as Pip's tattoo. Beneath it, Miles had written a short note in his sloppy scrawl. "If anything happens, follow the mark. It's not just about animals. It's about people." Claire stared at the words until they blurred. The air in the room felt suddenly thinner. She looked down at Pip, asleep now, his breathing shallow but steady. He had no idea the storm he'd dragged into her life. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "All right, partner," she said to Ranger, forcing steadiness into her voice. Looks like we're back in it. The dog tilted his head, tail twitching once. A sudden crackle came from the radio. Sheriff Harper's voice again, faint but distinct through static. Unit 2, this is command. Power crews delayed. No need to respond to wildlife reports until morning. Stay put. Claire frowned. Harper's tone wasn't casual. It was firm, controlled, like a man making sure certain questions weren't asked. She pressed the button. Command, this is Officer Donovan. Copy the order. But I've got a situation here. An injured pup with unusual markings. Requesting a file check on case 47RL. No response. Only static. Command, repeat. Do you copy? The line went dead. She stared at the radio. That's not normal, she muttered. Ranger let out a low rumble. Claire turned back to Pip. The puppy stirred in his sleep, legs twitching like he was running through some half-remembered nightmare. His small chest rose and fell with effort. The tattoo seemed to pulse faintly with each breath. Claire brushed her fingers across his head. You're connected to something big, aren't you? She whispered. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the world beyond the frosted window remained buried in white. She looked at the reflection of her face in the glass, tired eyes, hard lines, a woman who thought she was done fighting ghosts. She wasn't. Not yet. Behind her, Ranger shifted, settling closer to Pip. The two dogs lay side by side, one scarred by the past, one branded by it. Claire turned off the lamp, leaving only the dim glow from the heater. She sat beside them, clutching Miles's note in her hand, and for the first time in years, she whispered a promise out loud. I'll finish what we started. The heater hummed. Snow whispered against the windows. And somewhere deep in the night, the wind carried an echo that sounded almost like an answer. The blizzard refused to end. By dawn, the world outside the police station had turned into a wasteland of white. Roads buried, trees bent beneath the weight of ice, the sky a dull sheet of silver pressing down on everything. The silence was so complete that even the creak of the station's roof sounded like a scream. Claire stood by the window, sipping cold coffee, her breath fogging the glass. She hadn't slept. Pip dozed inside a crate near the heater, wrapped in towels, tiny chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Ranger lay beside the crate, half awake, his tail twitching whenever the puppy whimpered. Claire's phone lay on the desk, screen black, no signal, no messages. The storm had swallowed every connection in and out of Aspen Ridge. Figures, she muttered, tapping the useless screen. Of course, the one night I need help, the mountain decides to cut us off. She turned to Ranger. You still think it's nothing, huh? Just a coincidence that he shows up wearing a trafficking mark? Ranger blinked slowly, unimpressed. Then his ears pricked. His head turned toward the door. Don't tell me. Before she could finish, the police radio burst to life, spitting static across the room. Claire froze. Through the hiss, a faint voice came, mechanical, distant, repeating the same phrase over and over. Aspen shipment. Midnight. Aspen shipment. Midnight. Her pulse quickened. Shipment, she whispered. The message looped again, then dissolved back into static. Claire crossed to the desk and adjusted the dials. Nothing. No channel ID, no source. Just the phantom repetition of that phrase like a heartbeat inside the storm. Ranger stood now, tail stiff, staring at the frosted window. He barked once, deep and deliberate. Claire frowned. You heard it too, didn't you? He barked again, nose pressed against the door. Where? She asked softly. What do you smell? Ranger's gaze shifted toward the north, the dark line of forest barely visible through the white haze. Beyond it, a cluster of buildings sat half hidden among the trees. The old Silver Paw Rescue Center, a once busy shelter that had closed after funding cuts 5 years ago. Claire felt a chill crawl down her spine. That place had been part of the old case files. She looked down at Pip, who stirred and whimpered softly, as if sensing her thoughts. All right, she said under her breath. Looks like we're taking a field trip. She slipped on her parka, holstered her sidearm, and bundled Pip into her jacket's inner pocket. Ranger paced at the door, eager, ready. "Stay close," Claire warned, "and don't do that hero thing again. Got it?" He tilted his head, pretending not to understand. The storm clawed at her the moment she stepped outside. The snow came up to her knees and the wind tore at her hood. Each breath burned like glass. Still, she pressed forward, following Ranger's steady form ahead of her, a gray blur, cutting through the white. It took them nearly 20 minutes to reach the edge of the forest. The trees loomed tall and black against the endless snow, their branches creaking under ice. Through the veil of falling flakes, Claire spotted the outline of the abandoned shelter, a long, low building with shattered windows and a rusted metal roof. She adjusted her grip on her gun. "All right, let's see what ghost you're chasing, Ranger." Then, movement. Not in the building, but on the road leading up to it. A figure hunched beside a stalled jeep, struggling to dig its tires out of the snow. Claire called out over the wind, "Hey, you need help?" The man looked up sharply, startled. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, tall and lean under a brown field jacket, a wool hat pulled low over his forehead. Snow clung to his dark beard. "Depends who's asking," he shouted back. "Police!" Claire held up her badge. He straightened, relief flickering across his face. "Good, because I'm about 2 hours away from freezing to death." She approached cautiously. "What are you doing out here?" "Trying to get a story," he said, brushing snow from his jacket. "Name's Evan Brooks, freelance journalist. Denver Post contract when they remember to pay me." Evan's eyes were intelligent and curious, the kind that missed nothing. There was a worn-in kindness about him, the kind that came from too many nights spent listening more than speaking. His camera hung from his neck, lens crusted with frost. Claire gave him a skeptical look. "You're investigating Aspen Ridge? In the middle of a blizzard?" "Yeah, well," he said, shrugging. "The story wasn't supposed to bite back this hard. Heard rumors about illegal animal shipments running through mountain towns like this. Didn't think they were true until—" He paused, noticing Pip peeking from her coat. "Until that." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You know about this?" Evan crouched slightly to look closer, careful not to touch. "That marking under his fur, the code. I've seen it before. Used in transport manifests for exotic species. Wildlife black market, usually through freight labeled as medical samples." Her chest tightened. "So it's real." "It's worse than real," he said grimly. "If that puppy came from a coded shipment, it means the network's still running. Probably right under local radar." Ranger gave a low growl, scanning the tree line. Evan straightened. "And judging by your friend here, I'd say someone doesn't like being investigated." Claire looked toward the old rescue center. The roof sagged under snow. A faint light flickered through one of the broken windows. "Looks like they're home," she muttered. Evan followed her gaze. "You're not seriously going in there, are you?" "Got a better plan?" He gave a dry laugh. "Not dying would be nice." "Then stay close and keep your camera down." Together they crossed the field, snow crunching underfoot. Ranger took point, nose to the ground, every muscle alert. As they neared the building, Claire noticed fresh tire tracks half buried by the storm. Someone had been here recently. Maybe even still was. They reached the side door, half open and banging softly in the wind. Inside was darkness. The smell hit her first, a sour mix of rust, damp wood, and something older, sharper. Blood, faint but unmistakable. Evan wrinkled his nose. "Place smells like death." "Stay behind me," Claire said, drawing her gun. The beam of her flashlight cut through the gloom. Rows of empty cages, overturned tables, broken medical equipment. The walls were scratched with claw marks, some fresh, some old enough to have faded under dust. Then she saw it. On one of the cages, scrawled in black marker, A47, Aspen shipment, 0, midnight. Claire felt her stomach twist. The same code from the radio. The same ghost calling her name through static. Evan's camera clicked softly. "That's your proof," he whispered. "This isn't just a smuggling base. It's an active transfer point." Ranger growled, head turning toward a stairwell at the back of the room. Claire raised her flashlight. A faint sound echoed below, a metallic clang, followed by footsteps. Someone was down there. She exchanged a glance with Evan, who mouthed, "You're not going down there, are you?" Her answer was the sound of her gun's safety clicking off. "Stay with the dogs," she whispered. And with that, Claire descended the stairs into the dark, the light trembling across cold concrete walls as the blizzard howled above, a single voice cutting through the storm, calling her deeper into the truth she no longer wanted to find. Break time. 23s. The old Silverpaw Rescue Center loomed out of the storm like a scar in the snow. The blizzard had thinned, but the cold had deepened, the air sharp enough to bite. The roof sagged under years of neglect, and one of the kennel signs dangled by a single nail, creaking softly in the wind. Claire pushed through the door first, flashlight in hand. The smell hit her immediately, a mix of damp wood, metal, and something faintly rotten beneath. She swept the beam across the main hall. Empty cages lined both sides, their bars rusted, some bent outward, as if something had clawed its way free. Ranger trotted ahead, nose low to the ground, moving with purpose. Pip stayed tucked inside Claire's jacket, occasionally stirring but too weak to bark. Evan followed close behind, camera hanging at his chest, his breath misting in the air. His jeans were soaked to the knee, his face pale from the cold, but his eyes, bright gray under the brim of his hat, stayed sharp, observant. "Looks abandoned," he said quietly. Claire shook her head. Not quite. She knelt and brushed a gloved hand across the floor. Fresh tire tracks, faint but visible, cut through the thin layer of snow blown inside. "Someone's been here recently," she murmured. Ranger stopped suddenly. His tail rose and a low growl vibrated from his chest. The beam of the flashlight followed his gaze toward a corner near the ceiling where a tiny red light pulsed. Evan cursed softly. "That's a camera." Claire's stomach tightened. "They're watching us." She moved closer. The camera was small, modern, no dust, no cobwebs. The lens glimmered faintly, the red light blinking once every few seconds. Claire pulled a glove off and touched the side. It was warm. Live feed. "They know we're here," she said. Evan exhaled. "Well, guess the welcome mat's out." Before she could reply, Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. He ran toward the back of the hall, where a row of kennels stood half-collapsed. His nose pressed to the floor, then to a patch of wall behind a stack of broken crates. Claire hurried after him. The wall looked solid at first glance, until she noticed a faint seam near the baseboard, a trapdoor nearly invisible under layers of grime. Evan crouched beside her. "Hidden access?" She nodded. "Probably the old basement. Rescue shelters like this used to have isolation units underground." She hooked her fingers under the metal latch and pulled. The door lifted with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. A gust of cold, metallic air rose up to meet them, thick with the smell of rust and something unmistakably organic. Evan swallowed hard. "I'm guessing that's not bleach." Claire clicked her flashlight on. "Stay close." Ranger descended first, every step silent, body tense. Claire followed, pistol drawn. Evan came last, one hand gripping the wall for balance. The stairs opened into a wide concrete room, the basement of Silverpaw. The light caught metal glints everywhere, cages, tables, scattered tools. But this wasn't a shelter anymore. It was a slaughterhouse. Tufts of fur clung to wire mesh. Dried blood streaked the floor in uneven lines. A few empty syringes lay near an overturned table, labels faded but still readable. Sedative compound X13. Evan's voice was barely a whisper. "Dear God." Ranger prowled the perimeter, nose to the ground. He stopped near a metal cabinet, scratching at the door. Claire crossed over and yanked it open. Inside was a folder sealed in plastic, a manifest list. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching when she reached one marked Specimen Log Series 47. The entries were typed in neat clinical font. Specimen 45. Status: transferred. Specimen 46. Status: deceased. Specimen 47, Pip. Status, missing. Her stomach turned. He was part of this, she said softly. They tagged him, cataloged him like property. Evan leaned closer, camera trembling slightly in his hand. So the shipment code wasn't just random. It's a tracking number. They're moving live animals as contraband. Not just animals, Claire said, flipping to the back of the file. The final pages contained encrypted codes beside names she didn't recognize, initials, transfer routes, and bank accounts. Someone's making real money off this. Suddenly a metallic clang echoed through the basement, loud near the far end. Ranger barked, bolting toward the noise. Claire spun, flashlight darting across the wall. "Ranger, hold!" she called. He stopped, growling at a half-open cage door that swayed slightly. Nothing inside, just the cold. "Probably the wind," Evan said, forcing a nervous laugh, but his voice shook. When he turned, his foot caught on a loose grate. He stumbled and fell, his legs slamming hard against the floor. "Damn it!" he hissed, clutching his shin. Claire rushed over. "You okay?" "Just bruised," he said through gritted teeth. She knelt, pulling off her glove and pressing her hand against the swelling. "Hold still." Evan winced, trying not to look weak. "You're good at this." "I used to patch up rookies," she said, wrapping his leg with a strip of gauze from her belt kit. Her hands were steady despite the cold. "Don't move too much. You'll tear it worse." He managed a faint smile. "You're not half as scary as your file photo makes you look, you know." "Who said I wasn't?" Ranger barked once, breaking the moment. Claire stood, eyes narrowing. "We can't stay here." She grabbed the manifest, slid it into her jacket pocket, and swept the flashlight one last time around the basement. That's when she saw it. A small monitor mounted on the far wall, blinking faintly. The screen showed a live feed of the room they were standing in, captured from the ceiling camera upstairs. Evan stared. "They've been watching us the whole time." Claire's hand went to her gun. "Then they know what we found." A soft crack sounded from above, wood under pressure. The ceiling groaned, snow falling through a gap near the stairwell. Ranger's growl deepened. "Time to move," Claire said. They scrambled up the stairs, Evan limping but keeping pace. As they reached the main floor, Claire shut the trapdoor behind them and kicked a fallen cage over it. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Through the shattered windows, the white landscape looked endless, peaceful, almost. But Claire knew better. Someone had been here tonight, someone who'd known exactly what was buried under Silver Paw. Evan leaned against the wall, breath fogging in the cold. So, what now? Claire looked at the puppy sleeping against her chest, at Ranger sitting by the door like a statue. "Now," she said quietly, "we find out who's running the shipments, before they realize Pip's still alive." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The heater clicked off, and outside, the blizzard began again, softer this time, almost like it was holding its breath. But in that breath, the faint red light on the ceiling camera blinked once more, steady and knowing. Someone was still watching. The wind had died down by the time they left the basement, but the silence that followed was heavier than any storm. The Silver Paw Rescue Center stood still, half buried in moonlit snow, its broken windows glinting like watchful eyes. Inside, the flickering red light from the hidden camera had gone dark. Claire wasn't sure if that made her feel safer or more exposed. Evan sat on a crate, adjusting the bandage on his leg. "Next time," he muttered, "remind me not to chase horror stories into basements." Claire allowed a faint smile, though her eyes never left the door. "You said you wanted a headline." He looked up at her. "Yeah, I was thinking something less suicidal." Before she could reply, the crunch of footsteps broke the stillness outside. Ranger's ears snapped forward. The shepherd let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the room. Claire raised her flashlight, gun in hand. "Who's there?" A familiar voice answered from the doorway. "Easy, Officer Donovan. It's me." Sheriff Wade Harper stepped into the light. His heavy coat was zipped to the throat, his badge catching the faint glow. His silver hair glistened with snow. Too perfectly. His smile, thin and practiced, didn't reach his eyes. "Hell of a night, isn't it?" he said, scanning the room casually. "I got a distress ping from this sector. Thought I'd find you frozen, not spelunking in a death trap." Claire lowered her weapon slightly, but her grip stayed tight. "That's funny. My radio's been dead since last night." Harper shrugged, stepping closer. "Old frequencies. You probably missed the update." His eyes swept over the mess. The overturned cages, the dried blood, the scattered tools. His expression didn't change. "Place looks worse than I remembered." "You've been here before?" she asked. "Once. Years ago. Before the funding cuts." He crouched to examine a rusted chain, running his gloved hand across it. "Back when this was a real rescue shelter." Claire's gaze dropped to his boots. The snow outside was fresh, still falling lightly, yet the soles of Harper's boots were dry, untouched by melting ice. He hadn't just arrived. He'd been inside long before they came back up. Her stomach tightened. "What exactly brought you out here, Sheriff?" Harper straightened slowly. "Like I said, I came to check on you, and to secure any evidence. We've got a team on the way. Federal Wildlife Unit. They'll take it from here." "Federal?" Claire echoed. "Since when does the federal unit respond to mountain shelters?" "Since this case crossed state lines," Harper said smoothly. "You did good work finding this place, but now it's time to hand things over." He turned his eyes toward Pip, still nestled in Claire's jacket. "That puppy, the one marked Specimen 47. They'll want to examine it. Best hand it over now so we can transport it safely." Ranger growled, low and fierce. His hackles rose, teeth flashing in the half-light. "Easy there," Harper said, taking a step back. "I'm not going to hurt anyone." But Ranger didn't stop. His growl deepened, ears flat, eyes locked on Harper's hand, the one inching toward his radio. Claire's voice hardened. "Ranger doesn't growl for nothing." Harper raised a brow. "He's a dog, Claire. He smells fear. Or guilt." For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the faint creak of the building under the cold. Then, from behind a broken kennel, Evan's voice cut in, soft, steady. "Sheriff, mind if I ask who exactly you called for backup?" Harper turned. "Excuse me?" Evan limped closer, holding his phone casually at his side, camera light off but recording. "Because unless I missed a press release, the Federal Wildlife Division doesn't dispatch teams without a request from state authorities, and I haven't seen a single marked vehicle out there." Harper's expression flickered. Barely, but enough. "You're out of line, son." "I get that a lot," Evan said. "But humor me. What's the name of your contact?" Harper didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button on his radio. Static hissed, then a voice came through, low and distorted. "Status check. Confirm package still alive." Claire's blood ran cold. Harper turned slightly as if shielding the radio. "It's under control," he said quickly. "Ensure Specimen 47 doesn't survive the night," the voice replied. The line cut off. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was Ranger's growl. Evan's eyes widened. "Jesus!" Claire raised her gun again, voice steady but cold. "Who was that?" Harper didn't move. His eyes met hers, calm, deliberate, like a man deciding which mask to wear next. "You're tired, Claire. Confused. You've been out in the storm too long. Let me take the animal. I'll handle it from here." "Not happening." Ranger stepped in front of her, body tense. The dog's growl filled the silence like thunder. Harper sighed. "You really don't want to make this difficult." Evan shifted his stance, slipping his hand into his pocket where his phone was still recording. "Pretty sure she already did." For the first time, Harper's smile vanished. His voice dropped to something colder. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Claire took a step closer. "Then why don't you tell me?" He hesitated, just long enough for Ranger to bark sharply, startling him. In that heartbeat of distraction, Claire lunged forward, ripping the radio from Harper's belt. She tossed it to Evan, who caught it, hitting playback. The recorded voice repeated, clear this time, mechanical, untraceable. "Ensure Specimen 47 doesn't survive the night." Claire's jaw clenched. Sounds like a kill order to me. Harper's hand went to his holster, but Ranger was faster. The shepherd leaped forward, knocking him off balance, teeth flashing close enough to make him freeze. "Call him off," Harper barked. "Not until you tell me what's going on," Claire shouted back. "I can't." His voice cracked with something that wasn't fear. It was regret. "You don't understand, Claire. You start digging into this, you'll end up like Kerrigan." The name hit her like a blow. Miles? Harper looked away. He was never supposed to die. He got too close. Ranger growled again, closer now. Claire forced herself to breathe, lowering her voice. "Then help me stop whoever killed him, whoever's running this." But Harper shook his head, eyes distant. "It's bigger than me, bigger than you. Just walk away." She stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then she holstered her weapon. "I can't." Harper's shoulders sagged, the smallest crack in his composure. "Then God help you, Donovan." He stepped back toward the doorway, eyes flicking to the trees beyond. They're already on their way. Who? But Harper didn't answer. He turned and disappeared into the white blur outside, his figure swallowed by snow. Claire stood frozen, heart hammering. Evan exhaled shakily beside her. "Well," he said, forcing a thin smile. "That went well." Claire looked down at the radio still in his hand. The light blinked once, then went dark. Transmission terminated. She whispered, "He was never here to save us." Ranger barked softly, pressing against her leg. Pip stirred in her jacket, letting out a weak whine. Claire looked out the broken doorway, the storm swallowing Harper's footprints faster than she could follow them. The darkness beyond the forest felt alive, waiting. And somewhere out there, whoever gave that order was still listening. The storm had turned the world into a blur of motion and noise, a swirling, endless white that erased every shape, every direction. Snow whipped across the headlights of the snowmobile like ribbons of smoke, blinding Claire as she gripped the handles, her knuckles pale through her gloves. Behind her, Evan held on tight, one arm wrapped around the crate carrying Pip, who whimpered softly with each bump. Ranger ran alongside, his powerful frame cutting through drifts of snow like a living compass. His breath came in sharp bursts of vapor, eyes locked forward. "Keep low!" Claire shouted over the wind. "If they catch our trail, we're done!" "They already have!" Evan yelled back, pointing behind them. Through the blizzard, faint headlights flared and vanished, swallowed by the snow, then flared again. A gunshot cracked the silence. The bullet tore past, sparking against a frozen rock. Claire swore under her breath, twisting the snowmobile down a narrow trail between pines. Branches whipped against her jacket. Snow exploded from tree limbs as Ranger bounded ahead, barking once. A signal. He'd found a path. "Follow him," Evan called. "I am," she shouted, though her injured shoulder burned with every movement. The snowmobile skidded, engines screaming. Behind them, two black vehicles fought the terrain, modified sleds, heavy and fast, their engines deeper than any local rescue units. Whoever Harper worked for, they came prepared. The radio clipped to Claire's belt crackled to life again. Harper's voice, calm, measured, almost sorrowful. "Claire, don't do this. You're making it worse." She gritted her teeth. "You're too late." "You can't outrun them," Harper said. "They don't stop for anyone, not even me." She yanked the radio free and threw it into the snow. Another shot rang out. The mirror shattered. Ranger barked furiously, circling back, snapping at the tires of the lead pursuit sled. The driver swerved, shouting, losing control for a split second. "Go, boy!" Claire cried. Pip let out a faint, trembling bark from inside his crate, small but sharp, like an echo of Ranger's cry. Claire glanced back just long enough to see his eyes, alert, defiant, alive. "Hang in there, little one," she whispered. Ranger darted across their path again, signaling another turn. Claire followed him into a ravine lined with jagged rocks. The storm funneled through it, screaming like a living thing. Then the ground vanished. The snowmobile hit a patch of ice, spun once, twice, then flipped. The world became a blur of white and black, metal shrieking, snow exploding, Evan's voice shouting her name before everything went silent. When the world steadied, Claire lay half buried in snow, her shoulder burning with fire. She groaned, trying to move, but pain ripped through her arm. "Evan," she croaked, "here." His voice came from somewhere nearby. "I've got Pip." "He's okay!" Ranger was already there, digging frantically at the snow covering her legs. His fur was matted with frost, his eyes wide with panic. I'm okay," she whispered, but the words came weakly. Ranger grabbed the sleeve of her coat and pulled, hard. Inch by inch he dragged her free, growling with effort. "Good boy," she murmured through clenched teeth. "Don't stop." When she was clear, she collapsed against him, clutching his neck for balance. He licked her cheek once, quick, urgent, then turned, scanning the horizon. Evan stumbled toward them, carrying Pip close to his chest. "We've got to move. They're coming." "Where?" Claire managed. He pointed toward the dark silhouette of a ridge barely visible through the storm. "There. I saw a cave entrance on the way down. If we can make it." A burst of headlights cut through the snow behind them. Voices shouted, muffled by the wind. "Go!" Claire pushed him forward. "Ranger, with him!" They half ran, half fell through the drifts, lungs burning, the storm clawing at their faces. Ranger stayed between them and the lights, growling, his body a wall of fur and fury. Finally, the cave appeared, a dark mouth in the mountainside, half hidden behind a curtain of icicles. They dove inside just as another gunshot echoed through the night. Inside, the silence was heavy. The wind howled faintly at the entrance, but here it was still, almost warm. Their breaths came in ragged clouds. Claire slumped against the wall, clutching her shoulder. Evan knelt beside her, tearing a strip from his scarf. "You're bleeding." "I've had worse," she said, wincing as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "You should see a doctor." "Got one in your pocket?" He smiled despite himself. Journalist, not magician. Pip whimpered softly from his arms. Ranger lay beside them, head on his paws, chest heaving from exhaustion but eyes still alert. Evan reached for the flashlight, angling it toward the wound. "You saved us back there." Claire shook her head. "Ranger did. I just held on." For a while, neither spoke. The sound of melting ice dripped steadily from the ceiling. Claire stared at the tiny puppy nestled against Evan's jacket, a heartbeat of warmth in a world frozen solid. "He reminds me of why I joined the force," she said quietly. "Back then I thought I could fix everything. Thought if I was brave enough, no one would have to die." Evan glanced at her, his expression soft. "Your partner?" She nodded slowly. "Miles. He trusted me to call the signal that night. I hesitated, just a second, and that was enough. The explosion went off before he got clear. Ranger and we made it out, but he didn't." Her voice trembled for the first time. "I've spent every day since wondering if I could have changed that. If maybe saving one more life now could make up for losing his." The flashlight's glow flickered over her face. The pain, the guilt, the fragile thread of resolve holding her together. Evan shifted closer, his tone quieter. "You can't rewrite what happened, Claire. But sometimes, saving something small is the only way we start forgiving ourselves." She looked up at him. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Ranger lifted his head, pressing his nose gently against her injured arm, as if echoing Evan's words. For the first time in days, Claire smiled, faint, weary, but real. She leaned her head back against the stone wall. "Then I guess I'd better make sure this little guy survives." Pip stirred, his tiny paw twitching in his sleep. Outside, the storm had begun to fade, the wind softening into something almost peaceful. But far below, faint in the distance, the rumble of engines echoed once more. Their pursuers hadn't given up. Claire closed her eyes briefly, feeling the pulse of danger closing in again. "They won't stop." Evan looked toward the entrance, jaw tight. then neither will we. And as Ranger settled beside them, keeping watch over the sleeping puppy, the cave filled with a rare silence. Not the silence of fear, but of fragile hope. Somewhere beyond the storm, the first hint of dawn glowed behind the mountains, and for the first time since this began, Claire allowed herself to believe they might actually make it through the night. The dawn broke pale and cold over Aspen Ridge. After a night of storm and pursuit, the first rays of sun spilled over the mountains like hesitant hope, soft, trembling, golden. The snow had stopped, but the air still bit hard. A thin fog clung to the trees, wrapping the world in breathless silence. Inside the cave, Claire Donovan stirred awake to the faint crackle of static. Her shoulder ached where Evan had wrapped it, and blood still crusted beneath the bandage. Ranger lay beside her, head resting on his paws, his chest rising and falling in slow, heavy rhythm. Pip slept curled against his flank, a tiny patch of warmth against the frozen world. Evan crouched near the entrance, trying to coax life from an old field radio he'd salvaged from the wrecked snowmobile. His fingers were stiff, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Anything?" Claire asked, voice hoarse. He looked up, shaking his head. "It's dead. But the transmitter's still intact. If I can reroute the frequency." He turned a dial. The speaker sputtered, then hissed faintly to life. Claire reached for the microphone, wincing. "This is Officer Claire Donovan, Aspen Ridge Police. Code 6 emergency. Requesting immediate federal response. Coordinates—" Static swallowed her words. She slammed the set with her palm, frustration rising. "Try the old emergency band," Evan said quietly. She twisted the knob, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, a voice broke through. "Repeat. This is Federal Wildlife Enforcement, Unit 09. Identify yourself." Claire's breath caught. "This is Officer Donovan. The Silver Paw facility is active. Repeat, active. We have evidence of illegal trafficking and multiple suspects armed. Please respond." "Copy that, officer. Hold position. Units are inbound." Evan exhaled. "You did it." Claire's shoulders slumped with relief. But it didn't last. From outside came the sound of engines. Not one, but several. Ranger's head shot up, his ears flattened. "Too soon," Claire whispered. "They're not the feds." Evan grabbed his pack, stuffing the hard drive they'd taken from the rescue center inside. "We've got to move." But it was too late. The growl of snowmobiles echoed across the ridge, louder, closer. Voices shouted. Commands barked into radios. Then came the metallic click of weapons being loaded. Ranger growled low in his throat, stepping in front of Claire. Pip whimpered but stood on wobbly paws, pressing against his protector. Claire chambered around, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me." Moments later, the first of Harper's men appeared through the fog, dark shapes moving between the trees, rifles glinting in the light. And behind them, calm as ever, walked Sheriff Wade Harper, his silver hair shining like frost. He stopped just beyond the mouth of the cave, his gloved hands resting on his belt. "You should have listened, Claire. You could have walked." "Away!" Claire's voice was steady. "You killed Miles. You sold animals like they were things. I'm done walking away." Harper's smile didn't waver. "You don't understand. This isn't just me. You think you can stop what's already bigger than the law?" Evan stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Maybe not, but the world's about to see it." Harper frowned. "What?" Before he could finish, Evan hit "Go Live." The phone began streaming, not just recording. The audio from the night before, Harper's radio transmission. "Ensure Specimen 47 doesn't survive the night." Played loud and clear, echoing through the mountains. Harper's eyes widened. "You son of a—" He lunged for his gun. The crack of gunfire split the morning. Bullets tore through the snow, sending shards flying. Claire dove for cover, firing back. Ranger barked furiously, darting between her and the incoming men. "Get down!" she yelled. Evan ducked behind a boulder, clutching Pip's crate tight. The phone tumbled into the snow, still broadcasting. Harper advanced, shouting orders. Take them alive if you can. Kill the dogs." That was his mistake. Ranger charged from the cave like a storm-given form, a blur of fur and fury. The first man fell before he even fired, knocked backward into the drifts. Ranger turned on Harper, teeth bared, a snarl tearing through the air. "Ranger, no!" Claire screamed, but it was too late. Harper fired. The shot hit. Ranger staggered, blood staining the snow beneath him. But even wounded, he didn't stop. He lunged again, slamming into Harper's chest, knocking the gun from his grip. "Damn you!" Harper roared, wrestling him back. And then a flash of movement. Pip, the tiny German shepherd pup, barreled out of the crate, barking wildly. Against all odds, he launched himself at Harper's wrist, biting down with every ounce of strength he had. Harper screamed, stumbling. The gun slipped from his grasp, skidding across the snow. Claire was there in an instant. She kicked the weapon away and trained her own on him. "It's over!" Harper's men hesitated, glancing at one another. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the valley, faint but rising. Evan shouted, "The feed's live! Everyone's watching! Drop your weapons!" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one by one, the men lowered their guns, surrendering to the inevitable. Claire dropped to her knees beside Ranger. Blood matted his fur, his breathing shallow but steady. She pressed her hands to the wound, tears blurring her vision. "Stay with me, buddy," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're not leaving me again. Not like Miles." Ranger's tail thumped weakly against the snow, his eyes still fierce, still loyal. Minutes later, the real federal units arrived. Marked trucks, armed officers, flashing lights painting the snow blue and red. Harper was cuffed without resistance, his face pale, his eyes hollow. In the back of his truck, the agents found a metal case filled with encrypted drives and documents, lists of transactions, names, codes, photographs of animals long lost to cages and markets. Evan watched silently as the agents loaded the evidence. "There it is," he said softly. "Every story they buried." Claire stood over Ranger, her hand trembling as she stroked his fur. "We didn't let them win." Harper, being led past in cuffs, looked at her one last time. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. Claire's gaze hardened. "No," she said quietly. "It ends with justice." The agents dragged him away. The sun finally broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the snow. Claire knelt beside Ranger, who blinked up at her weakly. "Hang on," she whispered. "We're going home." Pip curled beside him, licking his muzzle gently, as if refusing to let go. And in that fragile, shining moment, the storm gone, the truth revealed. The mountain fell silent once more. Claire wrapped her arms around both dogs, tears freezing against her cheeks. "I won't let it happen again," she whispered. "Not to you. Not ever again." Outside, the valley echoed with sirens and the hum of helicopters. But inside her, for the first time in years, something heavier than snow began to lift, the weight of guilt replaced by the quiet light of redemption. The snow that once buried Aspen Ridge was gone. What had been a town of white silence and fear was now alive again, the mountains dressed in soft green, the air scented with pine and thawing earth. Streams rushed with new life, their waters bright as glass beneath the sun. The long, cruel winter had finally broken. From her office window, Captain Claire Donovan watched as the flags outside the rebuilt police outpost fluttered in the breeze. Below, a crowd had gathered, townsfolk, rangers, and federal officers, for a ceremony that marked not only justice served, but a new beginning. A large banner hung across the courtyard, Aspen Ridge Animal Task Force, Protect and Defend. It bore the image of two silhouettes, one large, one small. Claire smiled faintly. At her side lay Ranger, older now, his fur silvering around the muzzle, but his eyes as sharp as ever. The wound he'd taken that night had healed, though he carried a slight limp that never left him. He wore a new vest, black with gold stitching that read, Service K9, retired but still on duty. Beside him, bounding through the grass with endless energy, was Pip, no longer the fragile pup pulled from the snow. His coat shone in the sunlight, and he had grown into his paws, full of mischief and pride. Around his neck was a small medal engraved with a single number, 47. Not as a mark of what he was, but of what he had survived. Evan Brooks stood by the stage, straightening his tie, though it didn't quite fit his mountain jacket. He looked up at Claire, camera hanging from his neck, and grinned. "You know," he said, "they're calling you a hero now." Claire adjusted her badge with a small shrug. "I prefer Lucky." "Luck doesn't take down an interstate smuggling ring," he said. "Neither does guilt," she replied quietly. Evan's eyes softened. "Maybe not, but guilt's what got you here. And look what you built from it." On stage, the mayor called her name. Applause rippled through the courtyard as Claire stepped forward. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. She accepted the plaque with her good arm, her injured shoulder still stiff from that night. "Officer Donovan," the mayor said, voice carrying through the microphone. "Your courage, and that of your companions, brought light to one of the darkest storms in our state's history. On behalf of the people of Colorado, thank you." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ranger barked once, proud and loud. Pip followed with his higher, playful echo. Laughter broke through the solemnity. After the ceremony, Claire and Evan slipped away to the edge of the field where the river cut through the forest. They sat on a fallen log, watching the current glitter under the spring sun. "So?" Evan said, opening his notebook. "They're publishing the piece next week." "The article?" He nodded. "I called it The Night of Two Shepherds." Claire looked at him, brow arched. "Poetic." "It's true," he said simply. "Two shepherds, one who guarded the law and one who reminded her what it was for." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You give dogs too much credit." Evan laughed. "And you don't give them enough." He flipped the page, glancing down at his notes. "You know, there's something people keep asking me." "What's that?" "After everything, after Miles, after Harper, why didn't you just leave it all behind?" Claire looked out toward the valley where children played in the thawing meadows and the wind carried the scent of wet soil and pine. "Because running never fixed anything," she said softly. "And maybe I finally understood that justice isn't about punishment. It's about protecting what's left." Evan nodded slowly. "That's going in the article." Ranger gave a low, approving huff, as if agreeing. Later that afternoon, when the last of the crowd had gone home, Claire walked with her two companions to the hill overlooking Aspen Ridge. The air was still, the sun warm on her face. She sat in the grass, setting her cap beside her. Pip curled up between her knees, gnawing playfully at a twig. Ranger lay beside her, lowering his head onto her lap with a content sigh. Claire brushed her fingers through his fur and looked out over the valley. Alive, reborn. Quietly she said, "We lost a lot in the storm, but we also found a reason to keep going." Ranger lifted his head slightly, pressing his muzzle against her arm. Pip looked up at her, tail thumping against the ground. In that small moment, the golden light, the whispering wind, the two shepherds at her side, everything felt whole again. No guilt, no ghosts, just peace. The wind carried Evan's voice from below as he spoke into his camera. Some stories end in silence, but this one ended in sunlight. And on that hill above Aspen Ridge, under the first warmth of spring, 3 survivors, 1 woman, 1 old dog, and 1 brave pup, watched the world turn new again.